Good morning, everyone. Welcome to an all-new edition of Artsbeat and On the Mark here on Westville Community Programming on 89.5 FM WSKB and our media partners at Agawam Media and Southwick Community Programming. I'm Mark Auerbach, your host, and today we're spending the hour with playwright, actor, and therapist Jay Sefton. Good morning, Jay.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you here. You were here last summer talking about your play Unreconciled, which was having a workshop production done at Chester Theater. And now, a year later, it's going to be staged as a fully staged production with a world premiere this summer. So, first of all, who's involved in the world premiere production?
So it'll be at Chester Theater, and James Barry will direct, and I'll be in it. And James has compiled a new design team, and so I'll get to meet them in the end of June and into rehearsals. And so I'm not totally sure of every aspect has been put in place yet, but performances will be July 4th to the 14th. I'm pretty sure there's 12 of them in those 10 days.
And we should tell people you can find out information at chestertheater.org, which has all the how to get tickets. And also, you have a co-writer on the play.
Yes, Mark Basquill. And he's a playwright and a psychologist in North Carolina. And we actually met in person for the first time on stage last July after the first workshop production performance. So we worked together on Zoom for about a year and a half and then met at the talkback afterwards in person.
Was he in person what you had expected from working with him for months?
Yes, yeah. I mean, he's a very warm, kind person, and that all came through at our meeting on stage. So yeah, we've become good friends.
I got to ask you, how difficult was it? I mean, this Unreconciled is your story.
Right.
How difficult was it? It's a traumatic story. How difficult was it to take that story and transform it into a play that people could watch and not be swept away by its tragedy, but more by its optimism?
I mean, it took a while, and I think the first time that Mark and I said, all right, we've got a draft. Let's read it out loud. I think it was 2 hours and 45 minutes, a little longer than the running time now is about 80 minutes. So it was a lot of whittling away, and one of the things that we wanted to keep an eye on. So I'm a mental health counselor. Mark's a psychologist. Exactly what you said. We wanted to make sure that audiences that come to see it knew that the performer was okay. And so, we've tried to weave a lot of humor in, and it just took time. It took time to whittle it down, try and get it tight to where it feels like it clips along and there's humor and right up against some of the more dramatic spots. And
does the actor in you feel any sense of trauma when you're telling your own story?
I don't think so. If anything, it's the reverse. Particularly with this issue, it has and banging up against some of the politics in Pennsylvania. The story, I grew up in Philadelphia, so the story takes place in Pennsylvania, and some of the politics that have gone on there, particularly around statute of limitations reform, has felt like screaming into a void. And so this feels the opposite of that. I mean, you're in a room with people telling your story, getting immediate feedback. There's something energizing about, getting up and doing that.
And we should tell people it's your story, but it's the story of a young man who goes to a summer theater camp so to speak, that's run by the church. And the boy is abused by a priest. And it's how you come to terms with that as an adult.
Yes. So at my grade school, there was a priest that would wrote and direct a passion play. So it was it was around now, it was during Easter. So it would happen during the school year. And we would do performances at the church, and then we traveled around to other schools and to some nursing homes. And so the priest that was later defrocked for his treatment of the kids playing Jesus in this passion play, I played Jesus, and so next year will be the 40th anniversary of the Passion Play. So this was 1985. I was 13 years old, and so yeah, it's the story of that, and then the way that there was a grand jury report in Philadelphia that got released in 2005 surrounding the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. In that report, there were recommendations for statute of limitations reform. 2018, they did a report of the rest of the state, and from that, statute of limitations reform started to happen in all these other states around Pennsylvania. The Archdiocese set up a victims' compensation fund. So this is my story of the Passion Play and going through the victims' compensation fund almost 15, 20 years after the grand jury report was released in Philadelphia.
You've had a career both as an actor and as a therapist. So being a therapist, did that help you define the play in terms of what your story would be profiling?
Yes. They definitely feed into one another. There's the concepts of the false self, of shadow side that I only got familiar with later in life, have found their way into the play, and the conversations that go on inside my head, how I'll gaslight myself, how the way so that stuff comes out in the play.
You've had a really incredible acting career, and there are not a lot of equity actors based in Western Mass who live here year-round. But you did a show for Berkshire Theater Group and Wham last year, What the Constitution Means to Me, and that went to the Capitol Rep in Albany, and then Unreconciled, which you did at Chester, and then again in East Hampton.
Right.
And you're just ending a run at the Majestic in a new play called Lady Slipper. How many shows do you get to do a year?
Well, this year has been an outstanding one, and I will say it all began with right around this time last year, Kristen Vangenhoven and Talia Kingston reaching out to me and saying, do you want to come and audition? I hadn't done anything since 2018, part of that pandemic related, but part of it I was building a therapy practice. And so this was a year above everything you just described. It's been probably the most active acting year I've ever had.
And totally unexpected.
Yeah.
So Lady Slipper ends its run before this program actually airs. Mm-hmm. What happens between now and rehearsal period for Unreconciled at Chester?
I will be reacquainting myself with the material, running it in my living room for my cats. I'll be walking around East Hampton streets, running it out loud. There will be part of a new play festival at Capitol Rep.
That's in Albany.
In Albany. There'll be a one night, I believe it's going to be April 17th there. I'll do sort of a tune-up workshop performance at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown on May 25th. Pretty sure it's the 25th. It's that Saturday. And then late in June, we'll go into rehearsals at Chester. So I'll take some time to relax as well.
Yeah. Now, after you did it last summer, the playwright James Barry, who's going to direct it again, and your colleague Mark Baskill, who co-wrote it with you. Have you revised it or changed anything to it based on the audience response and your comfort level of doing it?
There have been line tweaks along the way. Structurally, it's pretty much what it was. There'll be some design elements that I'm really excited to see what happens at Chester. We'll have a full design team and access to a full rehearsal process for it. So that's really exciting to me. Some of the stuff that, a year ago when I was just sitting with a script and an idea and some dates in July, I used names of classmates that I've gone back and changed. So that just to make it a little bit more clear, I've changed some of the names. I'll memorize those new names and be using those. Not a huge change, but for me it'll be a big shift.
Now, I know it's a challenge to do a one-person show. I've talked to a lot of actors who have done them, and they say it's really a challenge because you have nobody to act off of and share your energy with other than yourself and the audience. Is it a challenge to you, or do you like it?
Both, I would say. I'd say it is a challenge when the characters can get clearly defined for myself and I can start playing with switching back and forth. It can start to feel like I'm in a scene with somebody. And it's also fun. The biggest scene partner, like you mentioned, is the audience. And that can be frightening, but mostly fun. There was some stuff that happened in Chester that, the one night I was doing the part where I become the priest, and there was a thunderclap. It was in the middle of a thunderstorm that was placed so perfectly, and then you feel like you're really just there with the audience because we're experiencing this thing together at the same time, unexpected, and then incorporating it into the play, and that can feel like flying.
But this isn't your first experience with a one-person show.
No.
You did one. I went through your bio and found, I guess I searched on YouTube for videos of you, and there was another one that you had done in the past. So you like the challenge of being on stage by yourself?
Yes. Yeah. I like the challenge of creating the different characters and seeing if... I love the idea of a production that's minimalistic. You show up with a bottle of water and a chair and see if you can create a world without props, without set, definitely with sound and light, but can a world be created? And that challenge I like.
And maybe this year at Chester there'll be that thunderclap will happen
right.
occasionally on the same night.
We'll have a sound cue maybe even.
How did you and James Barry connect?
James has a great line that we were set up on an artistic blind date. We have a mutual friend, Len Berkman, who when I was talking to Len one time about, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, James, I believe, was a master's candidate at Smith and working with Len. And Len said, you need to meet James. So we did. We met for coffee, talked through some ideas. I went away for a year and some change and worked on the writing, hooked up with Mark Baskill, and came back to James. Len and his wife Joyce had a brunch and invited me to come read it, and invited James and my wife and I and Len and Joyce were there, and we had brunch and then read it. And James was like, what do you think about coming to Chester to do it as a mid-season event? So that's kind of how that happened.
And how did you and your co-author hook up? Because you did everything by Zoom.
Yeah. So after I went through the Victims Compensation Fund, I had written an opinion piece that got published in a Harrisburg newspaper, and that was sort of the first foray into telling my story around this, and it started to get shared a little bit online, and I'm pretty easily found through the therapy website. So other survivors would start reaching out, and I just talked to them about my experience in the program. That was mostly what people wanted to know, because I went through it pretty quickly, and I just enjoyed those conversations. Mark was one of the people that reached out and said, "Hey, do you have a few minutes to talk about your experience in the program?" We did. We hit it off. We talked a few more times. He told me about his plays. And then when I got stymied in the writing process, I had sort of a light bulb of like, I should reach out to Mark and see if he'd be willing to come in and see if we can collaborate on this.
There's another playwright, a guy named Martin Moran, who was in Broadway in Titanic, who had a somewhat similar story to yours and told his story as a one-person show. And what the critics said was it had a lot of people who had suffered from abuse reviewing who they should tell, what kind of help and therapy they ought to get. As somebody who suffered abuse, is it difficult to come out and tell your story?
Yes. Yeah. I just watched the other day another solo show called Groomed by a guy, Patrick Sanford, who's from England. And one of the things that he captures and is in my show as well a bit is that conversation in the head of like just trying to work through like what happened. What does it all mean? There's lots of discussion that will go on up inside the head. So it is hard to come out and tell the story. I think it happens in bits and pieces. The first one was with a therapist when, Father Smith was defrocked, and the article came out in the newspaper. And so I started working with a therapist. The writing of the op-ed was a big one because I thought, well, nobody will publish this. And then when somebody got back and they're like, we're going to run this in 2 days, I thought, oh, well, nobody will see it in Harrisburg. And then it starts to get shared, and I'm like, well, and so it starts to kind of trickle out. And then hopefully, and I think this was the case for me, by the time I'm sitting on the stage at Chester and the lights come up on me, I'm ready to tell that story. Because like I said, I don't want an audience member to think, is he okay up there? So all that trickling out happens in the exact time that it needs to happen in order to take the stage and do something, I think.
Wearing your therapist's hat, if somebody believes that a friend or a relative or a partner has been the victim of abuse and they don't talk about it and you feel awkward asking them, what are the signs of adults that adults show where they might have been a victim of abuse, and how do you handle someone who has been abused?
Going deep quick.
Yeah.
I think as a therapist and as a person, I believe in the respect of somebody's process. So what I try and create in the therapy office is a safe space for somebody to come to what they need to come to in the time that they need to come to it. I don't, even if I suspect something, I note it and try and put it away. I don't want to assume anyone else's experience in their life. And if there are places where people are struggling, I'm happy to ask some questions around what you think the origin stories of a particular belief is that is no longer serving your evolution. But that's a fairly vague question of, let's explore why this symptom might be presenting itself now, and what's the information it has to bring to us in this moment, and go at it for, I really try not to assume anybody else's experience or what might be the origin story of a particular behavior that's getting in the way or may have brought somebody to therapy, or if a friend is, I don't know if that totally answers the
Yeah,
question.
but I'm also wondering if you live with somebody or have a friend that you suspect because of certain behaviors may have been a victim in some way, do you talk to them about it? Do you question them, or do you just ignore it?
Well, I think the most healing thing that was ever said to me and that I share with people a lot is you can say anything to me and you don't have to say anything to me. I think making it as safe a place for somebody to reveal something and in the most unconditionally accepting way. I mean, I think it's fair to say, hey, I've noticed this. I don't know if you have. And if you ever want to talk about this, I'm here for that conversation. Whether it's the behavior that you've noticed, not like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would assume that many people that have been abused, whether it's through the church or any other circumstances, not all of them can talk about it, and it must impact them in many ways that they may not imagine it impacts them. So how do they reach out for help? It's got to be a very uncomfortable thing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the important things about doing putting stories on stages and trying to get it out there is if somebody has, they may find their way to a theater, and seeing somebody else do it could be what's needed. I mean, I'm sure Spotlight had that effect on people, and so highlighting these stories and people that can tell their stories, it's important to tell them because it gives other people permission to tell them. But I mean, I agree with you. It can be really difficult to know where to start and to connect those dots. I mean, I had been working with a therapist myself for a while, and I was struggling with drinking a lot. And, I always knew from an early age, I'm going to have to get a handle on this. And it's an up and down thing. After the Father Smith was defrocked and the article comes out and the Catholic Church says, we'll pay for your therapy, I had already had a relationship with my therapist. I went in and I said, hey, I can come every week now because the church is paying for this. And he looked at me, he said, why is the church paying for this? And I tell him the story. He's like, I think some of this makes sense now. So to your point, the person may not be connecting those dots.
Yeah. And I would hope that people that come to see Unreconciled that have been the victim of abuse, or somebody whose family member or friend has been, walks away with a different perspective, maybe more understanding. And understanding is probably the key. Certainly the person who's been abused is a victim, but victims can turn their lives around.
Yes. Yeah. I love the idea of alchemy and taking a base material, running it through the fire of something, and it coming out the other side something different. And I think the arts in general do that. I think that's been this process of telling my story and running it through the process of theater, and then the fire of going on stage in front of people, and hopefully alchemy happens.
When you work as a therapist, have you had patients come to you who are also victims of abuse?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think the statistics are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. So probably I've had people that have come that are victims that I don't end up knowing about it as well. But
yeah.
Yes.
A question that I would ask is, what is your success rate in helping these people become more comfortable with themselves?
I suppose that would be a question for them. I can say for me, how I measure success for myself is the idea of the effort and not the results. I try and do that thing of showing up, creating a space where someone can feel as comfortable as possible to talk about whatever they need to, and know that they're not going to get judged by me. And even that's hard to measure success. I think that's why, when you get a Master of Arts in psychology, typically, I mean, that's what mine was. I think there is an art, there's science certainly in this, but there's also, this is where, theater comes in and feeds the therapy, and therapy feeds the theater.
But also, any actor who takes on a role has to be a therapist in a way, because they have to understand the character that they're playing and the motivations. And although you can't change necessarily how that character is going to behave and respond, which might change the plot of the play, you have to understand what makes that person tick. And you as a therapist do the same thing.
Yeah, you're always holding out an idea of what's going on. And it'll be the person that will really diagnose themselves. That's the goal, is to have somebody figure out for themselves what it is that's going on. And, if you can facilitate that through certain questions and holding that space. And that's the thing about theater and being an actor. There's so many ways in. Sometimes something just clicks in rehearsal based on what the other actor is giving, and that happens in life too. We get into relationship with somebody, and now our conditioning is dancing with theirs, and that can happen in a rehearsal space too. And you're doing something that's true to the character, but you're not really sure why that is.
And I can see that when you're taking on a character like in What the Constitution Means to Me or Lady Slipper, one of the plays that somebody else wrote, but when you're doing your own story, that becomes complicated.
Yes. Yeah. And particularly when you're creating other characters within that. I think I played 12 in this. Some are more major characters than others, so I've given it more thought than the person that comes on for one line. But yeah. And the thing that I was talking about that Patrick Sanford did in Groomed, that of putting out there some of the, since you are writing the material, you can reveal some of the struggles that go on inside the head and play it out in characters of the false self.
Jay, we're going to take a quick break to acknowledge our underwriters. Before we do, if you want to see Unreconciled at Chester Theater this summer, it's written by Jay Sefton, starring Jay Sefton, directed by James Barry. It opens July 4th. It has a 2-week run. You can get information on the play and the designers and all kinds of tidbits about the show at chestertheater.org. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll return after these messages.
Underwriting for community radio is provided by the YMCA of Greater Westfield. Every day, the YMCA strengthens the community through programs and services focused on youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. For all the Y's many programs and services, visit us on the web at www.westfieldymca.org. The YMCA, 67 Court Street in downtown Westfield. We're more than a gym. We're a cause.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
Listen to me, Michael Buster McMahon, Mondays 8 to 10 a.m. to learn the stories behind your favorite songs. Or don't. I'm not the boss of you.
Community Radio
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to this special On the Mark and Artsbeat program. I'm Mark Auerbach, your host. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. If you've missed a part of today's program, or you want to watch it again or share it with friends, it's archived on YouTube under WSKB Community Radio. My guest this hour is Jay Sefton. He is a playwright, he is an actor and a therapist, and his play, his autobiographical play, Unreconciled, will be performed at Chester Theater beginning July 4th. And Jay, it's so good to have you on the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's talk about your acting career a bit. I know that you got started in a school play, but when you decided this was something you wanted to do, what are some of the credits that you've accrued over the years?
Well, so let's see. I grew up outside Philadelphia. Ended up getting a theater degree from Westchester University, just outside Philadelphia, and from there went to Austin, Texas for graduate school, but dropped out after a year. Went to Los Angeles and spent 13 years in Los Angeles. You know, had some theater, some independent film. Did an episode here and there of like The Wire and Grey's Anatomy. And
what did you play on Grey's Anatomy?
What do you call it, a paramedic. And I will say the best thing about that was it was a one-day thing that I had to do. I had because I can get really nervous, particularly on a set when they expect you to just go in and nail the thing. I only had one line, and the food was amazing on the set, so I got to eat as much as I wanted to, so that was nice. Yeah, it was just a paramedic in one of the shows. So as we were saying, this past year has by far been the best year. I mean, I did some theater in LA and worked at the Majestic a few times out here prior to this year. Worked with Silverthorne and did a play with Sheila Siragusa at Academy of Music. But truly, since doing What the Constitution Means to Me last May and this year has been the most creatively fulfilling year of acting.
What brought you to Western Massachusetts in the first place?
A romantic notion of leaves falling and bells ringing and people walking around reading books. My wife and I were living in Truro out on the Cape, and it was clear that we had to move and find a new place, and we were like, where do we go? And somebody had said, you should go check out the Northampton, Amherst area. So we did for a weekend, and loved it. Stayed in Northampton and rented an apartment for a year in Hadley, and just really fell in love with the place and moved to East Hampton. And we didn't really know anybody when we got here. So,
but now you've become very connected in the theater scene.
Yeah. My wife is a writer, and she's very connected in the writing scene, which is really rich and
What
vibrant.
kind of writing does she do?
She's finishing a memoir right now. She's starting her second book of fiction, and she teaches a writing course with a Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop, and so she's a wonderful editor and writer and teacher.
There are not a lot of actors that are here in the Valley that are equity actors that have the opportunities that you have to perform in places like Berkshire Theater or Capitol Rep and stuff like that. What are some of the memorable things that you've been able to do here in Western Mass?
$1 Million Quartet at Majestic Theater was, as close to, and I played Sam Phillips, so, I'm not playing any instruments or singing, but boy, every night the response, it's as close to a rock star as I'll ever get to. That was great. I did Outside Mullingar there. I love doing 2 rooms at Silverthorne. And then both of these, What the Constitution Means to Me, working with Kate Baldwin and Kim Stauffer and Kristen, and those were just really memorable, and they all kind of fed upon one another. I did, to get back comfortable on the stage, I did a reading out in Provincetown, then went and did What the Constitution Means to Me in the Berkshires, and it's a supporting role, but I get to be on stage the entire time and watch two fantastic actors really perform a solo show, kind of, and that was just perfect to ease into doing a solo show myself.
I've seen both of those actors before. Kate Baldwin has done a lot of musical theater, and to see her do a non-musical thing, she was riveting.
Yes, yeah, lots of fun. They both, her and Kim, totally a blast to be on stage with.
And Kristen Van Genhoven really is quite the director, and she put Wham on the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you've done some what they call fresh takes.
Right. Yeah, I've done some readings. That's how I came to know Kristen and Talia a bit, was through the fresh takes readings. So I had not seen What the Constitution Means to Me when they reached out. I thought it was a solo show for a woman, and when Kristen was like, "You want to come audition?" I was like, "For what?" She's like, "No, there's a part in there." So really grateful.
Yeah, I saw it in Hartford, and I love the fact that they handed out little copies of the Constitution to everyone.
Yes. We've got like 15 of them at my house right now because, my wife has come to see it several times.
What's next for you after Chester?
Well, Unreconciled will be doing 3 performances in Belfast, Ireland in August. So that'll happen pretty fast afterwards as part of the
festival. Is James directing it there as well?
He's not. It's so he'll be, in Chester working with Chester. So somebody who had come to see it last when it was in July at Chester is going to step in to direct, to do the directing part of it for this festival in Belfast. It'll be August 9th, 10th, and 11th.
Your first theater venture out of the States.
Yes. Yeah. I'm thrilled.
That's really exciting.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you writing any new plays at this point?
No. No, I've written 2 solo shows that have been autobiographical. I don't know what the future will bring, but I'm kind of focused on seeing where this one can go. One of our hopes is to bring it back to Philadelphia and trying to get that done. We did one night in a rented space at the Arden in the beginning of December in the hopes of getting other theaters interested. Nothing has panned out at this moment, but we'll see.
If you were to sit down and write something else, would it be autobiographical in nature, or do you fancy yourself as a playwright who could write for comedy or drama or something different?
I don't know. I've never ventured outside of autobiographical things, and
out of curiosity, what was the first one you wrote before Unreconciled?
So it was called The Most Mediocre Story Never Told, and essentially it was my first foray into the psychology world. So, I was an actor in Los Angeles and I thought, I'm going to throw everything at this. And it starts as some solo shows do, of this is where the beginning is, and then it quickly gets hijacked by a false self character who's stuck in the past and wants to embellish stories and stay in the past. And it becomes a tug of war between that side of myself and the current side of myself. And stories get told, but they get told from different perspectives based on these two guys and them wrestling back and forth. The Passion Play is a story that gets told, but it doesn't get told in the way that Unreconciled tells the story. So it's just a piece of that play.
How long did it take for you to write Unreconciled? When did you decide you needed to tell your story on the stage? And how long did it take to get the first draft done and the revisions done to get it to the opening night last year?
So it was I think 2 years from the first time that I set an alarm at 6:30 in the morning and said, I'm going to go sit in the basement for 2 hours and see what happens 3 times a week, to on the stage at Chester. You mentioned Martin Moran. His play was The Tricky Part that he did. So he worked with Seth Barish, who does all of Mike Birbiglia's shows. So it'll be 2 years ago this coming September. We had a version, I should say, I had a longer version, sat with Gina Kaufman a few times and read it for her. She gave some ideas. That was part of the editing process, really an important piece. And then I took it through these workshops that Seth Barish ran out of the Barrow Group in New York City, but it was online and it fit in my schedule. And there were 8 weeks and the script changed from that. And so yeah, it was about 2 years from idea to being on stage.
Was it difficult for you to revise it from having written it beginning, and it's your piece of work, and then have people come in and comment on it, and you change it and revise it? Was it difficult, or were you good to go?
Both. I think, in the beginning when you start cutting, there's stuff that's getting cut out that I loved. Characters are gone that I loved, full concepts that are like, it doesn't serve it. Seth Barish I think one of the key things was surrounding myself with, or asking people that I really trusted. So I didn't know Seth Barish, but I came to trust that process, and I knew his work. And so I trusted that what he was saying, all right, I'm going to incorporate it. And I built the trust with Mark Basquill, and Gina I trusted. When she said, do this, I was like, I'm going to go do it. And then I started to fall in love with cutting, because I could feel it getting tighter, and I trusted the people that were giving the feedback. And you also start seeing pages that you don't have to memorize get lopped off. And as the actor, that's probably one of the benefits of being both. Yeah, I can fall in love with an idea, but I'm more in love with what's the tight script that I'm going to have to get up and perform, and I don't want to have to memorize a bunch of extraneous stuff that might have to get cut anyway.
I know that you did one performance of it in East Hampton at the City Space after Chester last year.
Yeah.
Did you revise any of it between the two?
We actually did 4, and there were tweaks. Lines got tweaked. Certainly, one of the great feedback things is we had a piece in there that referenced a line from Death of a Salesman, and we had the character wrong. And some very nice people were like, it's Linda Lohman that says that, not Willie Lohman. It's like, oof, thank you. Okay. So, those things, and, some stuff to try and punch up a laugh, because we'd feel that it was there, and then we'd try something different to get there. So definitely there was some shifts. And then the spaces, that's a fun part. Even if it creates some challenges at first, East City Space has some load-bearing poles that you have to deal with. And so it was fun, particularly with James, because he's great at this, incorporating those things. How do we use them? Let's not pretend that they're not there. Let's use them, and that was fun. So that I think each space creates a bit of a shift of the show.
How much of the play sits in your head at any given time, or do you have to go back and rememorize it?
It's pretty locked in there right now, even though the last time that I did it was December 4th. I've been going back in and making those changes to names, and I'm like, okay, this is, knock on wood, this is not going to take a whole lot to get it. And what a thing to be on the stage at the Majestic for 30-some performances now, just to get comfortable. That thing of memorizing lines, I think, is really a muscle, and once it starts to get going.
And the show that you just finished the run at the Majestic Lady Slipper, that was a world premiere.
Yes, Danny Eaton wrote that.
And how long ahead of time did you get that script, and how much time did you have to learn that?
So I knew quite quite a few months ahead of time that I'd be doing it. There was a new-ish script, maybe a couple months before, that it was like, okay, here's the new one. Then there were changes that have been made during rehearsal and during the run that get incorporated. But I had a real nice leisurely, I'm going to work on this page today, and had some time with it, which was great.
And I guess as a therapist, you're lucky because you get to schedule your patients, and you could have a day where you have 2 hours that you can practice the lines.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what makes this work, is that, for me, is that I get to have this schedule that I can sort of manipulate to fit, because a lot of the techs are Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon. And it's like, all right, but if I know in advance, then I can schedule people around, and it's not a big deal. So
That's quite, balancing 2 full-time careers, and actually 3 because you're the actor, you're the playwright, and the therapist. That takes a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. Luckily, the play is kind of, most of that heavy lifting has been done, but yes.
So when you go back into rehearsal at Chester, there is I guess a Tony Award-winning lighting and set designer whose name escapes me at the moment. How elaborate a production are you guys anticipating?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I'm not sure. I'm very excited to see what the ideas are around the projections and the sound design, and I'm also excited to get an actual. I don't think I've had sort of there've been rehearsals, but there hasn't been like, hey, here's 10 days to rehearse this play. It's usually been like, let's grab a rehearsal here, let's grab a rehearsal there. When we did we were in the space for 2 days, teching it before the Wednesday and Thursday, I think it was, hasn't been a real.
And Chester's a real small theater. It's kind of intimate. So I would assume it's be much nicer doing it there than it would be doing it at some 1,800-seat house.
Yeah, when I think about, if there was ever an opportunity to do it at an 1,800-seat house, I'd give that a run and say.
Well, you never know. Jay Sefton on Broadway could happen, but.
Yeah, who knows? I'd give it a shot, but I agree with you. When I think of the play, I think of it in a more intimate space.
How draining is it to do a one-man show?
Fairly. As I get older, too, I think when I did the last solo show, I was in my mid-30s. It's a bit of a different thing now. When we were in Philadelphia, we had 1 day to tech it and put it up in the same day, and we ran through tech, took about 3.5 hours. I think we said, let's take a 10-minute break, run it, and in the middle of that run, I was like, I got to really start marking this if I'm going to be able to do it in another hour and a half. And I don't think that would have been the case in my mid-30s. I'd have been like, yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
No, I think as we get older, we need to, our sense of timing changes.
Yes.
We have to figure that out. But I would assume doing how many shows a week of a solo show has got to be draining.
I will let you know after July. I think there's a week in there that there's 7 shows. And so I don't know I haven't had that experience yet. And I'm really going to try and take care of myself to make sure that.
Yeah. I know that Chester often does talkbacks with the playwright or the actor in the audience at several of their performances. Do you know if you're going to do those at Unreconciled?
Yes. Well, I believe whatever they normally schedule, and it's kind of set so people know which performances that'll happen at, we're going to do it at, and I look forward to those.
Once this run of this show ends and you move on to other things, in your mind, 5 years from now, do you want to be playwright and actor and not be a therapist? Do you want to be a therapist who acts and writes? Or where do you see your direction going 5 years from now?
If I could have years like the year that just happened, that would be really fulfilling. I don't foresee totally choosing one or the other. I would love to have both of these things continue to feed each other. What I set out a long time to do was to be an actor. So if acting took a little bit more of the forefront, I wouldn't be upset about that. But I don't want to not be a therapist and not be in that conversation with people. That existential conversation feeds the work so much. And
What intrigued you about theater in the first place?
I remember the first time. I used to be terrified to get up and deliver a report in school or to read from the book out loud. And I remember the first time doing theater, I wasn't scared in front of people. That was the first hook in. And then there were some experiences in undergraduate where I really, I was 22 when I went back to undergraduate after dropping in and out of school and said I'm going to be a theater major. And I just remember certain things like the people are so kind in theater that it really worked on a part of me that was. I grew up in a town where everyone would kind of give each other a hard time as a way of life, and theater, being around people that wanted to be kind to one another, was a corrective emotional experience for me that really played into this, and I still love being around theater people and artists.
Do you prefer stage or screen or both?
I'm loving stage these days. It's been a long time since I've done anything film or television wise, but I'm really loving being in a room, up on stage with other actors, in a room with people where there's that immediate exchange. And so I'm not saying no to anything, but if this was what life was, this would be great.
How often do you get to go to other people's theater?
Pretty good amount. I mean, the Majestic runs are amazing. They're 6 weeks long, 6 shows a week, so that kind of makes it difficult. I was able to catch a matinee performance of To Serve the Hive, which was directed by Ezekiel Baskin, and Wynn McKenzie, who does sound and projections for Unreconciled in East Hampton, was the technical director, so I was able to go see that, and it was great. But a pretty good amount, yeah.
Are there any theater companies in the area that you think, not the ones that you necessarily worked with, but theater companies that draw you because of their programming, that if you had an infinite amount of money to buy tickets and 7 nights a week available, that you'd be wanting to go see their stuff?
Well, after working at Berkshire Theater Group, kind of opened my mind to all of the things that are going on in the Berkshires that, sometimes I think, it's too far away, but I'd love to go back and see kind of everything that they're doing. Barrington Stage. I've become kind of interested in what Gloucester Stage is doing. And Hartford Stage, I'd like to get down there a little bit more. I'm going to go see All My Sons in April there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Marcia Mason is in there.
Yes, yeah.
And I saw her several years ago in Lost in Yonkers there.
Oh, really?
Which she directed there. I just think that we live in an area that is so rich in theater.
Yes.
That when I look at the schedules, I could go to the theater 2 or 3 nights a week because we have that much programming here. And there are often times when you have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
Because so much is going on.
And people really come out. Like, things will continue to sell out and stuff. It's amazing. Shakespeare and Company is one that I haven't really explored that much. And Greg Boover and Maddie Maggio, who work at Shakespeare and Company a lot, are in the Lady Slipper. So I love that there's this James Warwick directed Lady Slipper. There's this cross-pollination that's happening, and so I want to get up to there and see them.
And Williamstown, after several years of doing nothing, is now going to come back with a full season. So, we really have a lot going on.
Yeah.
I'm enamored by Theater Works in Hartford because they do small plays with big impacts. And I love Berkshire Theater and Barrington Stage. Chester, to me, is a gem.
Yeah.
And in the year that James Barry and Tara Franklin have taken over the artistic helm, some of the productions that they're doing and fostering are fascinating shows.
Yeah. I got to see almost everything last year and loved them. Great stuff.
And I got to admit, I'm a sucker for big Broadway shows, and the Bushnell in Hartford has a fabulous Broadway season.
Yeah.
And they're announcing their new one. It probably was just announced. I believe the 25th of March was the date that they were dropping the season for next year. But to go to see Moulin Rouge in your own backyard is just great.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very lucky out here.
Yeah, we are. Well, Jay Sefton, it is a pleasure to get to spend an hour with you today on two of our programs, On the Mark and Arts Beat. And I hope that I get to see Unreconciled and spend some time in the theater. Knowing you as an actor and playwright will probably give me a much different experience going to see Unreconciled than somebody who doesn't know you. But
Maybe.
Perhaps this program today will give a lot of people an introduction as to who Jay Sefton is.
I hope so. I really appreciate the time, and it's been great.
And I want to thank you for being here today. And I'll be following this play all the way to opening night.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And this wraps up another edition of On the Mark and Arts Beat. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. We'll see you next Wednesday or this Friday with new productions on both shows. Thanks for being here.